I feel like making this video is almost like a cheat that I'm giving you because it's a secret that I've been trying to unlock now for so many years of knife sharpening, and it's the mirror polish of the profile of a knife. And then I discovered this buffing compound by Koyo, and it has completely undone all of the hard work I've put, the countless hours I've put into knife sharpening and polishing. Those were hours not wasted, okay? I'm gonna keep telling myself that. Now, if you guys have seen my last few videos, you guys will know that I'm kind of on a kick with knife polishing right now, particularly yanagibas. So you guys may be wondering, why would anyone want a mirror polish, and why is Ricky talking about mirror polishes now when over the last few years I've always said that I like kasumi finishes better? So let me make a few disclosures. For my personal knives at home, my kitchen knives, my chef's, Kuritsuke's, Petty's, Notorious that I use at home, I don't really care to go over 3000 grit at the cutting edge. So for all my personal knives, my knives are only sharpened up to 3000 grit at the cutting edge and then strops. Now, this is a yanagiba, and single bevel knives, yanagibas, usubas, these knives are a little bit different when it comes to their cutting characteristics. They generally cut vegetables that may be thick and wide, starchy, daikons, fish, raw meats. So in those cutting scenarios, you'll find, and if you ever get a chance to use one, use two knives side by side, one with a mirror polish and one without. You'll notice that the knives with the mirror polish on their flat side, or the hiras, are definitely much more better at releasing food than the knives with the kasumi finishes or without any sort of polishes at all. Now, your knife's cutting edge on your gyuto is thinner than a width of a hair, so you can go from a 1000 grit to a 6000 grit or even an 8000 grit and get a nice clean edge. But when you're talking about, 3 or 4 square inches on a knife, that's a lot more area space to polish. And so your grip progression needs to be a lot closer. Now here's the thing, a lot of us want to get these mirror polishes for our knives, but to do it correctly, the traditional way, it's very expensive. Think about a whetstone. Let's say your average good whetstone is $40 to $50, and you gotta go from, let's say, 320 to 600 to 1000 to 1500, 2000, 3000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000. If you were buying cheap whetstones that cost between $20 and $40 that are sold on Amazon and eBay, sure, you can probably get away with spending $200 to $300. The cheapest method I have found, speaking with my friend Aaron Gibson, is using sandpaper going from 140, 320, 400, 600, 800, 1000, 2000, 3000 grit. That is the cheapest thing you can do for your knives if you want to get a nice mirror polish on your profile of your knives. That was the technique I used on this knife right here before I polished it with the Koyo compound. So aside from the raw cost of purchasing multiple whetstones, the second thing people have to worry about is technique. Sharpening your knives is hard enough. Polishing your knives is actually even harder because there's so many nuances and there's so many things that changes while you're polishing your knives from different whetstones. Now, one of the things that makes it most challenging for many people when using whetstones is that you want to keep your whetstones flat, so you have to buy a whetstone flattener. That is an additional cost. Now, the major problem people don't realize is the flatness of your whetstones have little to do with the problems that you will face. It's actually the flatness of the hira on your yanagiba. I have found that knives under $150 to $200, basically knives that are not using hand engraving for the logos, knives that use pressure engraving, those knives tend to have a concave section right along the logo. That poses a very difficult problem because you will have this concave section that you cannot buff out with a whetstone. And so for those who are getting into knife sharpening and polishing and you didn't know that, you will spend days, if not weeks, trying to, buff out one little spot on your knife, and you'll never get it because your whetstones can actually never reach those areas. When you are buffing this knife or polishing this knife an inch at a time, there is an area of overlap that is really hard to mix and mesh, and so you generally don't polish the entire length of the hira in one stroke. You can, that is a bit more challenging. So the recommendation is you do it in sections. And so when you blend it in sections, it's really hard to blend the overlap. And finding a way to blend those micro scratches is quite hard. You have to get a nice stroke from the heel all the way to the tip and back and forth repeatedly. So after I made the switch from whetstones to sandpaper, it was a huge godsend because now I can polish the entire knife using no more than $2 worth of sandpaper, even with all of those grits factored in. Basically, all you need is 2 to 3 square inches of a particular grit, progressively from 320 to 3000. Now, for most of us, that satin mirror polish you guys get from a 3000 grit sandpaper is more than enough. But you guys know me, I'm always pushing the envelope, seeing what I can do, especially when it comes to products that you can buy for cheap, which is what this one here is. The cost of this little container is somewhere along $10 or $11. It is the best $10 or $11 investment you can possibly make. Let me show you the before and after of what this knife looked like. Here's a knife with just a rest eraser. Here is what the knife looked like using just sandpaper up to 3000 grit. And now here is a knife after just using one treatment of the Koyo compound. You can probably use any sort of buffing cloth you want. Jewelry buffing cloth works fine. Microfiber towels work fine. I actually didn't have any laying around, so I bought the pink sheets that Koyo makes. I don't think there is actually anything special with this pink cloth. I think it's just jewelry buffing cloth, and they infuse it with a buffing compound. That's really what you're paying for. I did buff the knife with just the pink cloth, and it did okay. It definitely was better than the 3000 grit sandpaper, but it didn't give me that nice mirror polish that I really wanted. That's when I tossed in the Koyo buffing compound. So I used the blue because the blue one is technically for stainless, and I think it's also the most aggressive of all the buffing compounds. So that's what I use. I'm sure you can use other ones too. I actually also have the green because I have knives with brass fittings and brass rivets, but I don't think I'll be using it very much. For my knives, I'm sticking with the blue compound. I'm pretty sure that was what it was made for. And you can see the results are just absolutely fantastic. You can see during the buffing process, a lot of material comes off. I would have never guessed that even after 3000 grit of sandpaper, there would be that much material that would come off the knife. Clean up with a snap, you simply wipe it down and that's it. I would recommend you wash the knife before you use it on your food. It leaves no residue, it's super easy to use. But this knife here, literally after one treatment, this is how good the knife looks. I also wanted to point out, I did try a few things that people were asking me about. They wanted to see if I can polish out knives with scratches on them. So I took 2 knives that I'm working on. They both have lots of scratches on them. They basically were returns from customers. And I basically did the exact same thing, applied the buffing compound to the profile, wiped it down, and tried to buff it out using the pink cloth from Koyo. It didn't really do anything. You can see there's a lot of material that came off of the blade, but it wasn't enough to actually cover the scratches. Those scratches are left over from whetstones and from bones. I don't know what else is in it, but they're actually pretty scratched up. You can see they're pretty damaged. And so even though the buffing compound made the one side glossier and smoother, it wasn't deep enough to remove any major scratches. This yanagiba on the right is a true $700 knife, and you can see the mirror polishing is beautiful. And the knife on the left is this Tojiro, which only has one application of this Koyo compound. You can see they look fairly close. Obviously, if you hold these knives, you can tell which one is the more expensive one. But compared to this Tojiro, raw cost under $100, the knife brand new. The handle is about $100, and then 2 hours of sanding and sharpening, and then 5 minutes of buffing with the Koyo. So all in all, total investment was $200 and roughly 2 hours of sharpening and polishing time. If you went out and bought this buffing compound and try to put it on all your knives at home, you're just gonna waste your money. You're not gonna really get any of the results that you're looking for. You have to work up to that point. With 3M sandpaper, it was 3000 grit. Different sandpaper brands will have different levels of grit ratings, so you just have to be aware of that. Basically, go to the highest grit you can go to with whatever sandpaper you're using, and then apply this buffing compound at the end. Or if you already have a yanagiba or a knife with a mirror polish and it has some hairline scratches on it, then this would also be used to remove those scratches and bring that kind of that luster back to your knife. So it's not a miracle product, but it will definitely help you bring your polishing of your knives to a different level. I wouldn't buy this product if you were not planning to polish your knives profile. If you're trying to get something for your cutting edge and get your best cutting edge, that's all technique. A buffing compound will not make your knives any sharper. It only is meant to make your knives more glossy at the profile if you already have some sort of polishing technique that you're using already. This will just enhance that. This will not enhance knives sharpness. So that's all on you. I'll be using this Koyo buffing compound a lot more. I'll try it on some other knives, especially the Damascus cladded knives. Knives that are kind of sticky. I wonder if this will actually solve some of that sticky-ish issue with a lot of the Damascus knives that are out there. I'll report on that as soon as I can. So yeah, no buffing machine needed, no hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of whetstones needed, just some sandpaper and a bottle of buffing compound. So that is the biggest secret of knife sharpening, the mirror polish in a bottle. Alright guys, well that'll be it for this video. I'll catch you in the next one.